Okay, thank you everybody. I think we're all here now. I think so. Yep, so welcome to today's meeting of the City Built Council Area Planning Committee. And my name's Councillor Hollier, I'm the chair of the committee. Obviously, as usual, we've got, this is more for the benefit of people at home, because we are all sort of pretty familiar with who we are. But members of the committee either side, and we've got various officers. Just to note as well that our legal officer is sort of dialing in via Zoom. So if we do get a sort of voice from the ether, that'll be who that is. Move on then to the agenda and just ask if there's any declarations of interest. Councillor Daubney.
Thank you, Chair. Just to note that under item 4B, I sit on the board of the Theatre Royal as a City Council representative. Okay, Councillor Orwell.
Personal non-prejudicial interest on 4B. I know Mr. Crooks, who's mentioned in the report. We're both members of Merchant Taylors Guild.
Okay, Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I think if Councillor Daubney's recording being an observer to the board of the Theatre Royal, I will as well. I don't think it's relevant or prejudicial, but for openness.
Okay. I'll just note as well that we've got two apologies today from Councillor Fisher and Councillor Melly. So we've got Councillor Fenton subbing for Councillor Fisher and Councillor Looker for Councillor Melly. So welcome this evening. Minutes of the last meeting we don't have available yet, so they'll come at the next meeting. I think then we're on to item 3, which is public participation. We've got Councillor Waters to speak under this item. You'll know, as usual, you've got 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll give you a warning with about 30 seconds to go.
Thank you, Chair. Members might recall in December being encouraged to turn yet another residential family home in Osbaldwick into a student HMO. Not that some of you needed much encouragement, but you were encouraged to do so by officers on the basis of the hopelessly inaccurate council database of HMO numbers. Residents in Hambleton Avenue told you the figures were wrong, and I told you the figures were wrong, and you ignored us. Now, the latest council tax exemption figures for Hambleton Avenue are telling you the calculations you were given were wrong. We now have 6 confirmed HMOs benefiting from the educational council tax exemption, obviously at the expense of council tax paying residents. Even if one of these exemptions applies to the property you lot wrongly approved, then 5 apply to student HMOs in Hambleton Avenue. Adding to the one non-student HMO and another HMO within the 100 yards calculation area on Osbaldwick Lane. With 58 properties, that's 12%, plus the one you approved, that's 13.7%. Any wonder I and residents have no confidence in the whole system, including this committee? The only explanation I can see is the unofficial HMO that officers refuse to count in the figures is not only operating, but getting subsidised to do so by this council with the council tax exemption. Or the property opposite that is in the middle of a block of 4 HMOs and had been a HMO for over a decade before briefly being rented to a family is full of students again. And what enforcement action will the council be taking? Absolutely no effective action. The system is a joke, and it's made worse when members led by officers refuse to listen to people who know what's going on. Not only at this level is the system a joke, but right up to corporate director level does this attitude prevail. Despite a motion to have the acceptable percentage thresholds for approval of HMOs to be initiated without delay, which was approved at full council in December, nobody within the council administration wants to do anything to expedite that motion without delay. But then again, given the laughingly titled HMO database, which is proven time and time again to be hopelessly inaccurate, who will know what percentage you lot are endorsing anyway? Thank you, Chair.
I object to being what you lot, and I think it's time council Waters acted like a sensible, reasonable individual, and I object to it.
Okay, I don't want to get
As a point of order, can I respond to that?
As a point of order, you are rude, unpleasant, and very, very...
Thank you. Councillor Galvin.
As a point of order, can I respond to that then?
Very, very briefly.
Well, Councillor Galvin wasn't even here in December.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been referred to as your lot.
Councillor Gallagher, can we move on now, please?
They're not.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Standards complaint incoming.
Okay, if we can move on then to item 4A, which is Unit 6 at Clifton Moor Retail Park. Gareth, if you're able to.
Thank you, Chair. So this is excuse me. This is a planning application for the extension of an existing mezzanine floor within an existing vacant retail unit in the Clifton Moor Retail Park. Location on the site plan. This is the proposed ground floor. The extent of the mezzanine is to the right of that pointer there. At the moment, there is an existing mezzanine, but it's only in this. It's quite a small one in the corner for office and staff facilities. Google satellite view is showing the units here. The northern section of the outer ring road, the rest of the Monks Cross shopping park. Whilst this area of parking here is within the red line of the application, we have been informed by the applicant that they have all units have use. Visitors can park in the car park between the units there. There's no update to the report. So the recommendation is as per the agenda.
Thank you. And we've no public speakers on this item, so I'll just ask straight away if the committee have got any questions. I can't see any, so if anybody's happy to move into debate. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's a shame that we're losing something from the city centre, but satisfied that the sequentiality has been properly looked at, and so I see no reason to do anything other than support the officer recommendation, and therefore I'm happy to move approval.
Thank you. Anybody willing to second? Or Councillor Webb first?
Yeah, just formally second. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further debate? No? Okay, we're happy then. Gareth, you can just give us a quick summary.
So it's been moved the recommendation subject to the conditions in the report.
Okay, if I could then see all those in favour. I think that's all those. Any against? Sorry, no. I think that was unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. So if we could move on then, so that is approved. Can we move on then to item 4B, which is the magnet?
Thank you, Chair. This is an application at the Magnet 57 Osbaldwick Lane. It's for the erection of 8 dwellings following the demolition of the existing public house. So the site plan is on the screen behind you. So the building in grey, this is Osbaldwick Lane. The access to the side, as well as serving the car park for the pub, also behind a barrier serves Campbell Court, which is a housing association scheme of 2-storey dwellings for older people. There is a small commercial yard of mixed uses here to the east, behind a house which I believe is a house in multiple occupation. This is proposed, so there's a line of 5 dwellings across the front, 3 facing out to the access road, parking to the rear, and gardens of a variety of sizes to the rear. Aerial photograph showing the extent of the property, so a 2-metre high brick wall forms the rear of the site. This is the elevations. So this is the terrace facing Osbaldwick Lane. And this is the terrace facing the access road. There is a printed update on the table in front of members. So if you can just run through that, please.
So last Thursday, the 3rd of March, we received a new report from the applicant, which was a titled Report Concerning Economic Viability of Reopening and Sustaining a Public House, prepared by Florette Surveyors, who are specialists in the leisure industry. It's quite a detailed report, but the main conclusion was that Florette stated that the Magnet Hotel is not an opportunity or undertaking that is economically viable for any party who is subject to the norms of profit motivation and market-led commercial costs of finance in the current economic and financial circumstances, nor indeed those reasonably expected to apply in the short to medium-term timeframe. Should a party nevertheless undertake such a risk and investment, they would, in their opinion, be subject to a high risk of business failure. I've done a lot longer summary, but that was the main conclusion from that report. We're also proposing some small amendments to the conditions, which are listed in the update as well. Which some of the first ones are just minor amendments to text, and then we're adding an additional condition, method of work statement for highways.
Chair, I just realised I truncated the presentation a little. There are some ground level photographs of the building as it stands recently. So you can see there the Campbell Court properties to the rear. That's from that's the 2-metre high boundary wall that I was referring to. And there's some more recent residential developments on the south side of Osbaldwick Lane. And then that's the access, and the access in to the site is taken roughly that position, yes. And these photographs were taken after the use had ceased, but I think these were taken in 2018 or late 2018, early 2019 maybe.
Okay, I'll ask if the committee have got any questions on the presentation that we've just seen. Councillor Orrell.
Yeah, and the report refers to the potential sale to a dentist, and the agent says that as it's Class E, it's not a community use. Could Gareth explain the differences between Class E and Class F, and why a dentist wouldn't be a community use?
In terms of the use classes order, the class E is the very relatively newly consolidated business and commercial use class, which encompasses shops, restaurants, offices. It also encompasses day nurseries, some medical facilities. Class F is a specific community use class. For the purposes of the policy, which predates the use classes order, slightly different because it policy H3 specifies what that policy relates to in its supporting text, and it specifically states. So, in terms of what is a community use for the purposes of policy HW1, this states this may include libraries, post offices, community meeting places, places of worship, parish villages, village halls, and then was subsequently amended to include public houses. But the following paragraph then says that sports, childcare, medical and cultural facilities are excluded from this and are covered elsewhere in the local plan. So I suppose if the existing premises had been a dentist and we were looking at a change of use for that premises, it quite clearly wouldn't be included in this. It wouldn't be assessed under that policy. So that's not to say that should if you were looking at a loss of a facility under policy HW1, that if a dentist came forward and proposed that change of use, you might consider that that could be a community facility which would satisfy one of those subheadings. And in this case, it's the report is very comprehensive, and we've looked at all of those subheadings to that policy. But the way the policy is worded, they only need to satisfy one of those policies, and one of those subheadings. And in this case, as the report says, we feel they've demonstrated the evidence that the commercial facility that's there at the moment, i.e. the pub, is no longer financially viable, and it's reasonable for the authority to look at the alternative use that is proposed by the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. I know from reading the report that whilst it's a non-designated heritage asset, it's not classed as a asset of community value. That's correct. Is that right? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Do we know whether any attempts have been made to classify the building as an asset of community value?
I checked the website when I wrote the report, and there was no nomination.
Councillor Crackhill.
Sorry, just a point of order. I thought we were asking questions on the report and then having a public speaker and then asking questions of officers. Are we doing that differently today?
Well, we're sort of just asking questions.
It's just I've got a bunch of questions. I'm not putting my hand up just because I'm waiting for the right part of the meeting.
Well, we've only got one public speaker, so I think we're on one item. So I'm happy to sort of have two bits of questions like we used to do. But Councillor Crackhill.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, just to clarify, I think you said something about we've established that the pub isn't viable, but this extra information we've had today is a report that was commissioned by the applicants fairly recently, apparently, or it would have been submitted sooner. And you've just summarised what Floret surveyors have said, haven't you? So it's obviously commissioned from their perspective, isn't it?
Yes, it's commissioned from their perspective. It's a very detailed report. I've obviously only had a week to review it, but we did have information that was submitted before then and taken into consideration the marketing and lack of any pub operator to come forward. Took that on balance as evidence that the continued pub use would not be viable, because just no one has come forward. If we'd had this report earlier, it would have been a much stronger evidence base of the applicant, but they didn't submit it.
Right. Can I have a follow-up question? I always grapple with this. So we're discussing viability, financial viability of investing in this as a pub, as a planning matter. That's correct, isn't it? Yeah. So, because we often say certain things are not planning matters, but is it not also the case that what the sale price that can be obtained for this building actually relates to whether or not we give it permission for housing or not? And if we don't, then the sale price for operators who want to operate it as something else will be lower.
Yes, we did have concerns about that. So we commissioned an independent assessment by Stapleton Waterhouse about the marketing. This we commissioned ourselves to look at the price and how the marketing had been undertaken. So taking that into consideration, their conclusion was that the purpose of the marketing was to prove the absence of a credible use of the premises as a public house or community use. Based on the information to hand, Stapleton Waterhouse were of the view that this was undertaken in an adequate manner. As an independent assessment, we had to obviously consider that it had been marketed properly.
Right, but we don't really know if potential applicants don't come forward because they assume it's going to be given permission for housing. We don't really know that, I suppose.
We have a list of people who came forward from the applicants and from other areas. Council Waters provided information on who historically has come forward, which seemed to broadly match.
Okay, Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I'm sure we'll get into quite a lot of that during the debate, Councillor Craghill. I think it's interesting to note that the Jubilee was valued at £200,000 and this was marketed at £500,000. My question, I just wanted to sort of consider, there seems to be just a little bit of inconsistency within the report around the heritage value. I think page 18, the heritage officer talks about the sort of loss of a significant building, the internal sort of structure of the building being significant. And then on page 35, there's at the end of paragraph 5.36, it says the magnet is not of exceptional quality, either in its interior or exterior, which seems to be at odds with both what the conservation officer has said and what CAMRA has said about it being a certainly citywide significant pub and potentially nationally significant certainly on its interior. I wasn't sure who had made that assessment at paragraph 5.36 and what the basis for that assessment was, as opposed to the conservation officer and CAMRA's assessment.
I do have the full consultation response from the conservation officer with me if we need to refer to it. But he felt that the exterior of the building, I can find where it says.
It says the exterior was not exceptional,
Yeah,
but
he
it
says
then goes on to talk about the significance of the interior being particular, it doesn't use the word exceptional, but it seems to talk of it in terms of it being of quite significant, sorry, I was going to say significance then, but quite high significance.
Yes.
The issue is that we've made the assessment that it's not exceptional. It may well be significant, but it's not of exceptional quality. There's a difference.
And so I'm asking who's made that assessment?
Well, the reports, we have so page 18 is the consultees, and then the assessment is the planning officer, taking into account what the consultees have said.
And so my question is, when the conservation officer is talking about the significance of the interior, and when CAMRA have listed it within their heritage pubs in 2000 and have talked about its exceptional quality in the city and of potentially being nationally
Have they used the word exceptional?
I don't know whether they've used the word exceptional.
I think if they've used the
and I
word
don't know whether there's a particular
exceptional, we would have said
planning,
it.
is there a particular planning thing for that word exceptional? It just that statement just seems to be a little bit at odds with what the consultees have said, and I'm not quite sure what the evidence behind that difference is.
For this application, CAMRA haven't provided any comments on the application.
But the two previous ones
They have, yes. But when the conservation officer provided their conclusions, they didn't talk about it being nationally significant. They talked about it being locally significant, and I don't think they've said the words exceptional. But I'd have to read.
So without getting too far into semantics, is there anything in planning? I know sometimes when we talk about harm and less than significant harm and those sort of things, the word exceptional is just a descriptor. It's not something that would be of planning significance in terms of this assessment.
Significance is the phrase significance is used throughout the MPPF, and it's an NPPF word. I'm just wondering whether exceptional is used for the higher. Right, it is, but not in a way that is in any way helpful to the discussion here.
Because paragraph 3.1, we talk about the exterior being relatively unexceptional. So I accept that, but then it goes on to say that the interior, the exterior contributes significantly to the history and the character of the area. The interior is more significant, so more than unexceptional. And I'm just, if there's no sort of particular weight or particular significance to the term exceptional, then we're maybe sort of dancing on a pinhead slightly, but it just, to later on in the report talk about it being unexceptional when we've talked about it in terms that suggest more than unexceptional by the heritage or the conservation officer. I'm just trying to understand why there's that difference. I mean, given that the MPPF says we have a presumption to retain significant heritage assets. Which is 5.19. The presumption is that the building should be retained as a pub over redevelopment of the site for housing.
I'm really not quite sure. I think you might have bamboozled me slightly. I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. The conservation officer doesn't mention that the interior is exceptional. It is of significant interest. There could be circumstances, and you should not take this as a comment on the magnet, but there could be circumstances where something is locally significant because it's the best that exists in the city, but that doesn't necessarily make it exceptional. It makes it locally important because we've lost all other similar facilities. So I think it's not inconsistent to say something is of significance while saying it's not exceptional. But we can't put our hand on a document for anyone that has said this is not exceptional. That's our judgment, our reading of the conservation officer's comments.
I have a paragraph I can read from his assessment. He says the building possesses locally significant aesthetic design value in relation to its exterior and interior, historical value in terms of its contribution to the legibility and interwar history of the area, and communal significance as a local landmark and when open a pub facility. The magnet was nominated for the provisional local list of heritage assets by CAMRA, and the building was previously been identified as a non-designated heritage asset of local significance.
From a slightly different angle, are there any aspects of that interior that could be removed without planning permission? Would that have a bearing on?
Yes, because it's not listed. I have asked that question of the conservation officer. The whole interior could be taken out and we'd have no control over it.
Any further questions at this point?
Could I just, something that Councillor Crawshaw said right at the start, in terms of the marketing and the price, it wasn't marketed for, there wasn't the point of the marketing and the point that we questioned, which is why we brought in our own consultants, was there wasn't a price. So I don't think you shouldn't say that it was marketed for £500,000 because that it wasn't marketed for £500,000. Might have been noted. People might have reported that they were told that that's what they were looking for. But in terms of the marketing, it was marketed without a price.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I accept that. I was going to raise a question possibly following the public speaker, but seeing as how we're on it, I might as well bring it on now, because it does seem to have been marketed in a very unusual way. It's been marketed with a suggestion that somebody should come forward and say that they guarantee it will remain open as a pub for 10 years and have the means to demonstrate that. And having spoken to a couple of publicans over the last couple of days about how pubs are normally marketed, that's a very unusual way of marketing a pub. And the sale price when it was initially bought in 2018 at 365,000 was considered to be far too high for a going concern as a pub at the time. So to then hear that it's being suggested when anybody inquires that it might be asked for 500,000, I'm just wondering what we as a planning authority, because when, you know, I think there's two aspects here, isn't it? There's the heritage asset of it, and then there's the viability aspect of it. When we're looking at the viability aspects around how it was run as a pub prior to it closing down and how it was then marketed, to what extent are we strongly interrogating the way that it has been marketed and accepting that that then is meeting the test of our policy? Because I know the letter of the policy is 12 months and it's been nominally marketed for 26 months, but 26 months of a pandemic, and apparently at a vastly inflated price for what it would sell for were it to be a pub, as opposed to were it to be a residential development opportunity, which I think is something of Councillor Craghill's point that she made earlier.
Well, as Sophie mentioned, and it's stated in the report, They were issues that we picked out of the marketing report presented by the applicant, and that's why we commissioned our own report into an independent assessment of that marketing, and that came back to say that whilst there were parts of it that were perhaps unusual, they felt that the marketing had been done adequately or appropriately. Adequately.
Adequate.
So that's what, well.
Yeah, no. It's their words, not yours.
Yeah, well, that's what we have. We've taken that, what is quite an unusual step of commissioning this this independent review, and that's what they've come back with.
Okay. Come to a sort of natural pause then. If we could bring in our public speaker, Councillor Waters again.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly taken a few years since this process has reached this point. It's almost 5 years since the previous landlord left and was able to get out of his lease through ill health. Enterprise Inn simply wanted to cash in on the site and no attempt was made to get another tenant or manager. I think that's referred to in paragraph 5.24, which is wrong. The pub then ends up in the hands of a property development company whose first actions were to trash a mature tree and the landscaped area to the rear, which conveniently you can see the tree on the first photograph. Had they not been reported in 2018, I fear the place would have been demolished there and then. So then the developers embarked on a planning route to have this non-designated heritage asset demolished, standing as it does in the way of some proposed housing to be shoehorned on the site. But they had a problem. There was no viability assessment of the pub. And as such, we then saw the pub go through a so-called marketing period. December 2019, back on the market. I knew a developer who was interested, and we walked around the site in January 2020. His architect then drew up a scheme with 5 starter homes on the back car park. The upstairs rooms were to be used as Airbnb and the pub fully refurbished. He had someone lined up to run the pub and wanted to make an offer subject to an internal viewing. The selling agent, instructed by the owners, ignored all overtures by the prospective buyer for a viewing, with him emailing at one point, do they actually want to sell this building? Interestingly, that correspondence was after protest by the agent removed from the planning file. I have other examples. I draw committee's attention to paragraph 5.29, and I also find paragraph 5.30, Roman numeral 7, very interesting. There's been a quite deliberate and cynical attempt to run down a perfectly good building in furtherance of demolition. I hope committee realise this decision today has wider implications. Because if such behaviour is rewarded, no pub in York, and I mean that no pub, is viable when compared with its site potential for housing. The recent Jubilee decision shows the way forward with landmark buildings like this, where dual use subsidises continued public house function. And the magnet could be the same if the rear car park was given over to housing. Time the magnet as a non-designated heritage asset was brought back into use, and this application being refused ought to be the start of that process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll just ask if the committee has any questions. Councillor Orrell.
Yeah, the report gives your parish councillors objecting, but it doesn't mention any other objections. Did people come to the parish to object?
There's a number of objections on the planning file, but as I said, this process has been going on 5 years, so people get weary of objecting.
Okay. Any other questions? Can't see any, so I'll thank you for your time this evening, Councillor Waters, and your comments will be taken on board. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question following that.
Sorry, I was just going to say that page 21, 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.5 and 6 are other comments. Okay.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. It was just, and it's a tricky one this to ask, because I totally accept that we have to take the application that's before us here and now, but there's been 2 prior applications which have been withdrawn for very, very similar schemes from the same applicant with the same basic premise. Do we know what the number of objections were on those schemes as opposed to this one? Because I think that the point that was just made about people perhaps feeling that they've already objected to a scheme that's subsequently been withdrawn might assume that that objection would still be recorded or would still be relevant to a subsequent scheme.
My understanding is that I report the objections on the current application. I do know there were more objections to the previous 2 applications, but not the level that I understood was for the example Jubilee pub. There's never been that huge volume of objections.
But there were more objections on the prior 2 applications than on this current one. But they're not.
Yes, but I haven't counted them, so
yeah.
I can't tell you how many.
Yeah. Okay. Again, I think committee members can consider what we think about that.
I should point out that legally we can only take into account what's been
and that's why I caveated as I was asking my first question. I do understand that.
Councillor Fenton.
Just on the point of the the expressions of interest that that were made, and Councillor Waters mentioned one of them. In the independent work that the council commissioned to look at the work of the agents in terms of the advertising the site, do you know whether, was it Stapleton Waterhouse, do we know whether they spoke with any of the potential buyers who for various reasons didn't pursue the potential purchase, thinking in particular of the potential purchaser that Councillor Waters mentioned?
I don't believe that they did speak to any of the potential purchasers, and the one that Councillor Waters mentioned, he's been asked to particularly not be included any further in the discussion of the current application.
Okay, any further questions at this point? I can't see any, so if we're happy then to move into debate, if anybody would like to kick off. Councillor Crawshaw.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that everybody can see what is happening here. This pub was previously operated by Enterprise. Enterprise model of business is that they tie landlords to only being able to purchase particular products, which makes them very difficult to be viable. And I note the evidence that's been put forward of the prior viability of this pub when it was open prior to 2018. I think if you look at the Winning Post on Bishopsthorpe Road, if you look at the Golden Ball on Cromwell Road, both operated by Enterprise, both running at pretty difficult circumstances. The Golden Ball still, I think, has a link to Enterprise, but is now free of tie and is doing very well. The Winning Post was going to turn into a supermarket because it was promoted as being not viable, and is absolutely thriving now, having been taken over not by a community, but by a couple who believed in the pub and wanted to make it work for the community. I think that the way that Enterprise operate is that they look at where they can sell off assets to get cash. And I think that this has quite clearly been sold at a rate that is reflective of the development opportunity of the site, not of the ongoing pub and concern. And I think that the marketing that subsequently happened is very, very difficult to look at as being anything other than a cynical attempt to meet the policy objectives of HW1. And I think that the work that the local planning authority has done to assess that is completely fair enough, and it makes it quite difficult for us to refuse on the grounds of viability. However, I also think that this pub is significant for a number of reasons. The interior has been noted as being significant. The fact that it's the last or the best preserved improved pub I think is significant. The way that CAMRA has noted it 20 years prior to it coming forward for development as being a pub of significance, and that it's a non-designated heritage asset. But also, if you look at its position and you look at the way that it sits between the two different parts of that community on Osbaldwick Lane, the two different developments, and it's a demarcation between those two. So I think actually, if you look through paragraph DP3, local plan policy DP3, D1, D2, D7, these are all noted at paragraph 5.9, 5.13, 5.14. I think we can make a very strong argument that it fails to meet any of those tests, and therefore we've got grounds to refuse on any of those local plan policies. I think we should note the concerns around the viability as well. And I also think that we should note that if we are serious about addressing a climate emergency, we should not be demolishing buildings that are structurally sound and can be repurposed, if not reused, in the use that they're currently under. So for all of those grounds, I have no hesitation in suggesting that moving that we refuse this application.
Thank you. Anybody willing to second that? Councillor Perrott.
Thank you, Chair. I share some of the same concerns about losing the community asset, and I think because of the dating of the applicant's report on the viability being so recent, I think it does. It just seems like quite a cynical move to justify a decision to run down the property and not make it viable as a going concern and make it marketable only as a development opportunity. So yeah, I would like to second this. Thank you.
Thank you. So got it proposed and seconded that refuse the application. I think it's probably worth pinning down the reasons at this point before going too much further. Councillor Crawshaw.
Okay, so I would argue that it fails to meet the test of policy DP3, sustainable communities, because it doesn't respect or enhance the historic character and landscape of York. I would suggest that it fails to meet policy D1, local plan policy D1, because it fails again to enhance York's special qualities or better reveal the significances of the historic environment. Policy D2 requires development to respond to local landscape character, setting and context, and I think it fails that because it removes that context between the two different areas. And policy D7, which seeks to sustain non-designated heritage assets, and we're completely in acceptance that it is a non-designated heritage asset. Paragraph 5.19, there's several paragraphs of the MPPF that are quoted as being in support of the presumption being that the building should be retained as a pub over redevelopment of the site for housing. And I think that we could link those to suggesting that we have concerns about the way that the viability has been presented. And I would also note, as I say, that again, I don't know whether we could have this as a narrative or not, but I think we should be starting to look at whether or not it is acceptable to be demolishing buildings that are perfectly reasonable when they could be repurposed on environmental grounds.
Okay, thank you. Gareth.
Could I just, in terms of the demolition of the building, members may recall we had a similar refusal reason on the building on Tadcaster Road, because members considered that it was contrary to sustainability policies to demolish a building that could be converted. And we lost that appeal and we lost costs on that reason because there is no national or local policy which supports a decision on that basis. So I would advise members not to attempt to refuse a planning application on those grounds.
I'm happy to lose that if that's the advice of the officer, and if members are happy that we lose it. I think there's very strong grounds with all of the other things taken into account.
Okay, thank you.
I was just reading through the policy D2, the landscape setting. Because my my thoughts of that policy is it is more about landscape rather than townscape.
Only go on the wording that's here at paragraph 5.13, but
Sorry, what was that in the report? 5
yeah,
points.
page 28, paragraph 5.13, policy G2 requires development to respond to local landscape character, setting and context of the city, making a positive contribution to York's special qualities. I think it fails to do that. My point being the what's been flagged within the report about the relationship that this pub has as the sort of border between the two separate communities, the corporation development and the later suburban development, and that this was a pub specifically set between those two communities as a marker between the two to serve the two communities. And it removes that context of the city if we take that out.
I think the reason why D2 was in there was because we had the character assessment from the landscape architect, so you can probably refer to that as part of policy D2.
Not for me to say anything, actually.
Yes, I think we've got a list there which Gareth noted the policies, and I guess we'll be able to construct the final wording. Perhaps it's worth.
Can I suggest that if members resolve to refuse permission, then delegate the wording, taking that quite comprehensive list that you've given us, and take it back to chair and vice chair, just to make sure that was what was fully intended. So a lot of policies. I don't carry them all in my head.
Okay, I assume that's okay. And Councillor Perrott is the seconder. Fantastic. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. It's a tricky one. Obviously, the application as presented does have some benefits in terms of the provision of new homes, and that hasn't been mentioned, but I don't think we should totally ignore that. And I was thinking of other pubs that on my side of the city that are no longer, places like the Turf Tavern, Pack of Cards, Puss and Boots. None of them really were in this category in terms of the heritage asset scheme of things. The only potential comparison is Carlton Tavern, and obviously that was saved. I think the key thing for me is, are we convinced that there is no future for this building as either a pub or some other community asset? And whilst the marketing may have been adequate, this was not seriously marketed as as a potential pub. If it had been marketed at a price that you would expect to market it as a pub, and there had been no offers, that would give me more comfort that they had tried. Whether they could try cynically, but they could still try. But there was clearly, in setting no price or apparently setting a high price if you asked how much they were willing to offer, to accept. I'm really struggling to see how we could comfort ourselves that there has been a genuine attempt to sell it as a as a going concern. And Councillor Waters mentioned some conversations that he'd had with a potential buyer that didn't amount to anything. So what I'm weighing up is the benefit of the delivery of a small number of new homes, admittedly, but new homes nonetheless, and this kind of nagging doubt that there really hasn't been an adequate attempt to market this seriously as a potential pub or community facility, for which there may be no, in reality, there may be no no takers, but I just don't feel that it's been explored to the extent it should have been for, as we've heard, a building that does have local significance. Even if it's not exceptional, it does have local significance, which we've read about.
Thank you. Councillor Webb?
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd agree with Councillor Fenton's concerns around the marketing. And I think that whilst boxes have been ticked, and I think that has been sort of proven by officers, and therefore I think from a planning point of view, I think the cynical marketing might be cynical, but they have ticked the boxes that they need to tick, and that is a concern not for this application, that's a concern more widely, and we've discussed that several times. My major concern really is around the loss of a heritage asset, a non-designated heritage asset. That is, you know, it's an important piece of local history. I'm not the councillor for Osbaldwick, but I am the councillor for Heworth, which incorporates part of Tanghall Ward. And there's several references in here about closeness to various pubs. And several of them are further out in, and we had an item a while back about the difference between Osbaldwick Village and Osbaldwick Lane and how it becomes Tanghall and that difference. So a lot of them are going out of the city. There's talk of the Beeswing, which is at very sort of the top end of Tanghall, but not necessarily much closer to sort of Heworth Ward, really, actually. And I think we're in this situation where, yes, I can see that, thank you. But my point is that we're losing something for local residents that could be a viable and welcome asset. And I think the problem we've got is that because we've not had it proven to us that it is not viable, or at least we're concerned about that, despite the best efforts of officers to show that the tick boxes have been ticked, that's part of the problem. And for me, I think it does come down to that D2 context of the local area. And I think that this is a great example of something that was built for the people of Tanghall, people on Osbaldwick Lane at the time, and it's something that should be reclaimed. And I think it is worth trying this properly. And therefore, with some trepidation, I do think that I will be supporting the proposal that we've heard, because for me, I think taking something away yet again from the local people in that area will be very, very difficult. I recognise that it will need some work, but I think that the developers need to go away and think about what that work should be.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Orrell?
Yeah, just briefly, Chair. I agree with most of the things that have been said. In terms of conditions, I would hope that we'll make the conditions that we're sure about, rather than putting as many conditions in as possible, which some of them will probably fall. And if we've seen in the past that with too many conditions leads an inspector to look at those conditions that aren't supportable and influence the potential inspector's decision. So yes, refuse it, but get the conditions that are actually sustainable. In terms of buildings and climate change, if we haven't got policies now, I would hope we would get some soon that protect buildings from being demolished unnecessarily. Building anything has an impact on climate change. If you knock it down, it's a double impact. So we need to move that forward.
Okay. Can't see any further debate at that point. So I think it's probably worth testing the mood of the committee. So I'll just ask Gareth perhaps to give us a bit of a summary of where we are at the moment. And then I'll put it to the vote.
So, Chair, it's been moved that permission be refused because of the loss of the non-designated heritage asset, and in respect of initially that being contrary to policies D1, DP3. DP3? Sorry, Councillor, did you say D? I don't think there is a D.
Policy DP3 5.9.
5.9,
Page
page
27.
27.
Okay, sorry, the strategic policies. Okay, DP3 and D7 it was. And the loss of, so that principally the loss of the non-designated heritage assets, and it's really significant in terms of that local local significance in the area.
And I note what Councillor Orrell says. I don't know whether there's, because I don't think we can refuse on HW1, which is around the viability, given the tests that have been undertaken. But I think that the committee is saying overall that they have concerns about the way in which the viability has been demonstrated. So I don't know whether or not there's a way in which that can be recorded,
Councillor
or
Gowans,
should be recorded. But I'm happy that it isn't if that might muddy the waters.
I think a reason for refusal has to be defendable in its entirety. So concerns, I think perhaps there's something to be recorded in the minutes.
Yeah.
We don't normally put informatives on refusal notices because they don't
In
take
which case,
anybody any further.
I'm happy to take your steer on that. And I think it will evidently be recorded in the minutes that a number of committee members have raised concerns about the way in which the viability has been. I'm choosing my words carefully here, but I want to say manipulated. And I've said it now. So.
Do you need to say anything more?
don't think so.
Okay, that's good.
Yep, so it's been moved and seconded for refusal for the reasons we've been through, and I think it's been, it'll go to Chair and Vice Chair to agree the sort of full text of that as and when. So if I could see then all those in favour of the proposal. All those against. And I think that's everybody, so there shouldn't be any abstentions, but that was clearly one of the proposals. The application has been refused. So thank you everybody for your time this evening. There's no further business on the agenda, so I'll close the meeting there.